Good morning. My name is Don Tate, and I live in Austin, Texas. And I'm honored to be visiting with all of you in my home studio. I've been writing and illustrating children's books for 30 plus years, but I've been right here in this studio for about 20 years in warm, cozy Austin, Texas, where I absolutely love living. So I am really excited to introduce my next book. Is called William Steele and His Freedom Stories, Father of the Underground Railroad, and it publishes with Peachtree. And I'm going to read a bit of the story for you. This story begins at a time when the United States was split in two. In the North, Black people were free. In the South, they were enslaved by whites. Slavery was a nightmare. Back-breaking work under a scorching sun, threats of lashing or worse, no pay. Children were separated from their mamas and papas, brothers and sisters, sold away at auction, never to be seen again. Sometime during the 1700s, Levin and Sidney Steele were held captive on a Maryland farm, forced to work. Their 4 children were too. The family yearned to live free. I will die before I submit to the yoke, Levin told the man who enslaved him. The two came to an agreement. Levin was allowed to work over hours, actually receiving a small income. With the money he earned, Levin purchased his freedom. But freedom wasn't always fair, especially to Black people. Could a free man remain in the South? Levin must have wondered. Might he be enslaved again? No chancing that. Levin bid his family a goodbye with a plan to return to rescue them later. In the blink of an eye, he bolted north. Sidney wasn't so fortunate. There was no opportunity for her or the children to purchase their freedom. They remained behind, still enslaved, a separation that she couldn't endure. Torn and tormented, she whispered a parting prayer for her 2 boys, who were big and strong enough to fend for themselves, and she escaped with her 2 girls. Sidney reunited with her husband in the Pine Woods near Washington Township, New Jersey. Now they were together, free as the wind. They changed their last name from Steele to throw slave catchers off. Their new life was good, but living ached like an open sore. Levin and Sidney longed for the 2 sons they had left behind. Over the years, the family grew. Now there were 15 children, 15 mouths to feed. Oh, how they struggled. Money was tight, food was scarce, shoes, if any, were hand-me-down. In 1821, the youngest child was born. Sunlit eyes, mahogany skin, they named him William. He grew quick as a weed. 8 years later, a neighbor was attacked late one night. The man had once been enslaved in the South. He had escaped and found peace in the pines. Slave trackers tracked the man down. They rushed at him, cuffed his arms. They beat him badly. Thankfully, the man escaped again, but he needed help, and soon. The greedy men were still on the prowl. The neighbors, they called on William. They knew the young boy, knew every nook and cranny of the woods. William led the man to safety, some 20 miles away. The experience defined the remainder of his life. So young William eventually moved to Philadelphia, where he worked at the Anti-Slavery Society office. And over the course of the next 14 years, he helped hundreds of enslaved people escape farther north on the Underground Railroad system where they could be safe. And I was so inspired by his story. I had never heard of an abolitionist. William Steele was an abolitionist. And so I wanted to tell the story of not only William Steele, but the many hundreds of African Americans who played an important role in the success of the Underground Railroad system. So, what inspired me to tell William Steele's story? I love stories of little known historical figures. When I was in school, I remember studying all about Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King, but those stories often didn't go beyond the stories of Dr. King. And so when I got into publishing, I wanted to tell children the stories of other African American historical figures who did great things in the face of adversity. My mom, she knew that. And so she's always giving me ideas about people who I could write about, right? So one day she sends me this biographical dictionary of African Americans. And I'm like, Mom, you're constantly sending me stuff. I think she probably found this book at a garage sale somewhere. But that's okay. I opened up the book and I decided one day during Black History Month that I would draw a picture every day of the people I found in the book. So I drew Dr. King and I drew Rosa Parks and I drew so many other African American figures. And then one day I'm flipping through this book and I come across the name of William Steele, father of the Underground Railroad, a Black abolitionist. And I began to wonder, what is an abolitionist? When I think of an abolitionist, I think of Quakers, who were religious white people who are often talked about as saviors of Black people during slavery. And that was my image of an abolitionist. As I began to study the topic of William Steele, what I learned is that there were hundreds of Black people who opened up the doors of their churches, who opened up their homes. I learned that the Underground Railroad system could not have even existed were it not for Black people. And I remember in school, it was always my idea that it was the white Quakers who helped the enslaved people. It was always white people. But one of the other things that I learned is that those white people, after slavery ended, they were able to get their stories published. And they often centered themselves as the heroes in the stories, downplaying the role that African Americans played in saving ourselves. And so I thought, that's the story that I want to tell. I want to tell William Steele's story so that children understand the role that we played in helping our own people. So throughout history, Americans have demonstrated considerable ingenuity in overcoming obstacles. And those are the stories that I like to tell. Makes no difference whether we are talking about George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, who were imperfect figures. They went on to do great things to make contributions to our world, as did George Moses Horton, who was an enslaved poet who became the first African American to get a book published in the South, and he published while he was still enslaved, as did Lonnie Johnson, who was the inventor of the Super Soaker squirt gun. William Steele recorded the stories of enslaved people as they passed through his office. He not only recorded their stories, but he recorded details like the color of their skin, their height, where they were running away from, who had enslaved them. It was his hope that he could help reunite enslaved people after they had escaped north, to help them to reunite with their families. Little did he know that his work would help to reunite his own family. During my reading, you may remember I spoke about his brother and sister who had been left behind in slavery. Well, one day when William Steele was at his office, a man walks in. This man is broken and torn, and he wants to find his family. And what we learn is that this man is William Steele's long lost brother. This man's story reunited a family. And that's the important work that William Steele did. William Steele preserved stories. And I truly believe that was some of his most important work, because stories are how we learn about ourselves. Stories are how we learn about each other. Studying stories are how we learn about the future. And I honestly believe that stories save lives. So, what children can do to be sure that their own stories don't get lost and preserved, you can do exactly what I'm doing today. And I just decided this recently. I'm going to write a memoir. I'm going to tell the story of my life in graphic novel form. I'm going to use words and pictures. And I encourage kids to tell their own stories, not only so that they can take a look at and investigate their own lives, but think about future generations of children who want to study and learn about your life today in 2020, say living through a pandemic or whatever it is, whatever challenge that you may be living with at home. Think about that kid 100 years from now who wants to know what's going on in your life. Sit down and record your story every day. Talk about your family, your brothers and sisters, the things that are going around you in the world. How do you feel about the circumstances that you're living through? Record those things because those are the details that will help future generations of people. So, how might you continue to be motivated in telling your story? And I understand, you start writing and you start writing, and then the TV gets your attention or something else gets your attention. And how do you stay motivated to write? Well, how I stay motivated is that I have to write every day. Set a time, a special writing time that is just for you. And it's okay to get bored and it's okay to set that aside. However, I also think that what will help is to maybe get yourself involved with a little critique group. Maybe you have a group of friends who also like to write, and you can write your story and you can meet with your friends and you can share your stories in various states of drafts. Share those with your friends. Ask your friends, what do you like about my story? What do you think isn't working? How might I improve my story? And you can do the same with your friends. Offer them helpful feedback on the stories that they're writing. And you and your friends can act as accountability partners to be sure that you all are doing the work that needs to be done. And that's what I do. I have a group of writers, published writers, who help me to stay motivated in writing my stories. And sometimes I feel sad when the feedback is done. You have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. But mostly, I appreciate hearing the critical feedback because I know through revision and that second revision and that 40th revision that my story is getting stronger with each draft. So just know that your drafts, with each draft, your story is going to get better, and don't give up. So, what is the role that libraries have played in my life? And have I ever um, did any research through the Library of Congress? When I was a kid, I was not a big reader. Sometimes I feel embarrassed to say that. When I did read, I loved books like my family illustrated medical encyclopedia, um, because that book was illustrated with very few words. So I've always loved nonfiction, and because I read nonfiction as a kid, that put me on a path to telling nonfiction as an adult. There was a library around the corner from my house. And while I didn't go there to read, the librarians were so smart because they had activities that they provided. And I remember going there at Christmas time and decorating Christmas, making Christmas decorations and going there at Halloween and making Halloween costumes. But when I wasn't making the costumes and I wasn't decorating, I was going through all the books, looking at all the books. And so the librarians made the library a welcoming place for a creative kid like me. Have I ever studied or did any research at the Library of Congress? I certainly did. I didn't go in person, but I did my research on the website for a book that I wrote and illustrated called Strong as Sandow, how Eugene Sandow became the strongest man on earth. And if you look on the Library of Congress website, there is a picture of Eugene Sandow holding this huge barbell over his head. And he goes through a whole bodybuilding routine, and he actually does a backflip. So I encourage you to go to that website, see Eugene Sandow do his black backflip, and then you, through my book, can learn all about the life of a man who influenced physical fitness all over the world. So as an author and an illustrator, I love visiting elementary schools. With the COVID, I can't come in person, but through Zoom, I can welcome students into my studio where I love discussing my process as an author illustrator, especially the revision process, that a book does not happen in that first draft. And I also like to find that one child who loves to draw and maybe doesn't have the confidence to get their work out there. And so that they can see me as an example of the shy kid who didn't like to read, but liked to draw, but grew up to become an author and an illustrator. And so hopefully I can inspire those children. So thank you.